Black Agenda Report is usually like my go-to because I am the first one to admit, I think this is a general problem on the left. There's not enough focus on Africa. And I've been trying to correct that problem. Because when I say that I'm not being older than now, it's a mistake I made as well. Because there's so much focus on the Middle East. I would say for years I was really good at the Middle East. I covered Israel Palestine on RBN years before October 7th. People now covering, I was covering this shit left and right. So the issue I think a lot of people make is they only cover the Middle East. It's very important, but I don't think there's enough coverage about the imperialist actions in Africa. And when I first like, all right, I'm gonna try to improve my knowledge on Africa, which I think I made a lot of gains over the last few years. Black Alliance for Peace is one of the is like always like, all right, I want to learn more about Niger. Let's look at what Black Agenda Report wrote, for example. So I'm very interested in talking to you about this because I wanted to discuss the story at Nick at Night because there's a few very interesting events that happened in Niger. So you had Victoria Nuland, you had the Biden administration that went to Niger because you had increased Russian influence. And Niger and Russia had a long time relationship. They're going back for decades. But now, because Russia taking over Africa, they're trying to decrease the amount of Russian influence in countries like Niger, even though it wasn't a problem earlier. So you had the United States that was like, hey, man, can you guys stop doing business with Russia? You guys are being Putin puppets. You guys are doing the bidding of Putin. You guys need to stop doing. And so you know what these motherfuckers did in Niger did? They would do what anyone would do. Who the fuck are you to tell me who the fuck I can talk? So this is I didn't get a chance to cover it. I'm sorry I'm being long. I just want to properly introduce this, and I want you to chime in, Margaret. But look at this. Niger ordered United States troops to leave, and this happened after the Biden officials did this smug trip with Victoria Nuland and them, warning them with ties with Russia and Iran. So Niger had enough, and I ranted about this. I can go all day, but I'll cut myself short. There's so many offenses, and there's so many things that the United States government has done to lead up to this moment. Maybe you can speak up on this more. But this is what I want to ask you about, because look at this headline. No decision on fate of United States forces in Niger. So essentially the Pentagon, in response to the Niger government, was like, I know you guys want us to leave, but kind of not feeling it. So I know that was a long setup, but what did I get right? What did I get wrong? And there's anything you want to add about to the situation? Because, you know, I learned a lot from your outlet regarding this issue. So I'm looking forward to hearing we had to sound. Anything you want to add, Margaret?
Sure. Yeah, basically you got it right. Niger is one of the African states that had been colonized by France. And France believes it's a perpetual imperial power, and that these nations have to be under their sway in perpetuity. Now, Niger, there was a coup, military coup. Now, coups are problematic because, well, you know, you have electoral systems. They may be imperfect, but a military coup, you don't know if it's really happening on behalf of the people. The African Union has a policy of opposing coups, so they're problematic. But this new government has declared itself independent of the West. They have said we are a sovereign nation. We can ally ourselves with whomever we want. If we want to have to deepen our ties with Russia, that's our right. If we want to deepen our ties with China, that's our right. If we want to diminish our ties with the U.S. and other NATO nations, that's also our right. And there are drone bases in Niger. Yes. AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, which began in 2008, has meant a loss of sovereignty for African nations. Basically, there are various command structures all over the world. The United States has divided the world into these various commands. There's a Southcom for the southern Western Hemisphere. There's an Indo-PACCOM. There's a Eurocom. And then they started the U.S. Africa Command, which, because no African country would wanted to ally itself with this new formation. The headquarters actually is in Germany, which is very funny. But At any rate, the U.S., most African countries now have this military alliance with the U.S., which means that these countries have lost some of their sovereignty. It means they do what the U.S. wants them to do, not what they need to do for their people, not to make the decisions they think are best for their countries. And actually, there are more than 800 U.S. bases all over the world. That's important to say.
Yep.
So, this new government in Niger said, we want these bases out of off our territory. And as you pointed out, the US says, well, we're not sure. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't do what you have said about your own country. By the way, that's not unusual. A few years ago, when Trump was president, the Iraqi parliament voted for US troops to get out of Iraq, and they are still in Iraq. So
Yep.
this is something that the U.S. does in its bullying of other countries, its drive to dominate the whole world. But it's becoming more and more complicated for them to do so. They've already told the French to get out. That's part of President Macron's his hissy fit about Ukraine, and he might send troops there. And it's because African nations are telling France to get out of their countries
Mhm.
as well. But AFRICOM still exists. There are other countries are accepting U.S. Drone bases, and that's something to be struggled over, so that uh, people in African countries can have the countries they want, have the system they want, governments that serve their needs and not the needs of the U.S.
I want to get your thoughts on this because my interpretation of the Nigerian government for decades, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong on this, have they mostly been Western puppets who signed military agreements that made no sense for their people? Because there's no evidence, and once again, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong on this. There's no evidence of the United States actually engaging in counterterrorism, which is a problem in Niger. Terrorism is a problem for Niger, but the idea is that they signed up with this military agreement with sellout nations, sellout governments that Niger had. They often took bribes. In fact, I read like a few weeks ago how Emmanuel Macron essentially offered a bribe to the new Nigerian government, and they declined. And this is during the time when France wanted to form a coalition with ECOWAS to invade Niger after they declined their bribe. The reason why this is important because these African leaders will take these bribes and then sign military deals that makes no sense. For example, in the military deal with Niger, the United States had the right to reject requests for the Nigerian government to aid in counterterrorism efforts. So CJ wrong. If the Nigerian government say, "Hey, yo, we got intel saying that there's going to be a terrorist attack here, there are terrorist cells here," the United States government had the right to be like, "No, we don't want to risk our troops, and we don't help you there." So with that said, what was the point of the military deal?
Right.
So I want to pass to you, Margaret. How accurate is that assessment?
Well,
You
it is
had?
sadly accurate. You know, so many of these African governments. I mean, let's talk about what happens when African leaders emerge who want to be independent, who declare their independence, who say they're not going to do what the West wants them to do. What happens to them? Patrice Lumumba, right after Congo's independence, he was murdered. There are coups against other leaders. There are, they find other ways to control governments, and the end result is that most of these governments of African nations don't represent the needs of their people because and I think it's important to say that I don't like this idea that Africans don't know what they're doing and they can't govern themselves and they're just stupid. No, these things happen for a reason. There's economic pressure, there's military pressure, there's threats of well, speaking of coups being problematic, coups instigated from the outside. So these comprador governments are more likely to be in power than any leadership who are really acting for the benefit of their people and acting on the benefit of the entire African continent. So no, you're not wrong, and we have to applaud every effort for these states to assert that they're sovereign states, that they're not they don't want to be puppet governments, and for Niger to say we want you to get out, even if the U.S. says, well, we're not sure if we're going to. It's a very, very important step in having true independence for the entire continent.
This guy, and I'm gonna pass it to Rome and CJ if you guys have anything to add after this. This guy is the leader of Niger after the coup now. Adrame. I've been practicing how to say that. I think I'm still fucked it up. Adrame. I want to get your thoughts on him if you want to chime in with anything, because he got a lot of praise from anti-imperialists, from Pan-Africanists, and I'm one of the people who inherently want to hold leaders accountable. I'm very slow to praise people, but we just talk about how Nigerian officials took bribes, and Emmanuel Macron essentially offered a ton of aid, a ton of assistance if they turn into a Western regime, and they declined that. So that's essentially what Emmanuel Macron bribing him. That's how they do. They're like, oh, we give you all this aid, we help you with infrastructure if you become a Western puppet. And this guy declined it. He declined the bribe, and because of that, that's what led to the military intervention. Margaret, do you want to chime in? Anything you want to add?
You know, this so-called aid, it can be problematic. It's with strings attached. Countries get money if they promise to practice austerity against their people. The World Bank, the IMF, many African countries are indebted forever. They're kept in this, debt peonage situation. So these offers of quote unquote help generally are not so helpful. So I think he did the right thing. It will be interesting to see what the reaction will be, because these are not people in Washington and London and Paris and wherever who are likely to take no for an answer. And you were talking about Victoria Nuland, now gone from the State Department, thank God. But people like her are never gone. She'll be at a think tank, or she'll be back in government with the new administration. She's at Columbia now with Hillary Clinton. I guess it's a war.
Her mentees are going to get hired. The people that she's mentoring right now is going to get hired. So she's going to be.
Yeah, but she went over there right after the coup, trying to tell them, still trying to tell them what to do after they made it clear that no one was going to tell them what they're going to do. And this, this Wall Street
Journal, you see this. I want to show you this.
Interesting.
Yeah, I want you to react to this. I want to get Roman CJ in here if you guys have any question or anything you want to add. But this is one thing that pissed Niger off. You guys see how they accuse Niger of supplying Iran with uranium?
Well, that's their right. Even if, who knows if it's true, first of all.
Yeah.
And even if it is true, so what? That's their right. And Iran has a right to, they're still flogging this, Iranian nuclear weapon. Can I say something about? I'm going to digress a little talking about Iran. Yeah, Obama had a small rapprochement with Iran, lifting sanctions if Iran promised not to enrich uranium. Trump came in and killed that deal, and Biden has followed Trump. So instead of bringing back the nuclear deal that Obama had, Biden has followed Trump. And, we're always told Trump is so much more evil. He's a fascist. Well, what is Biden if he follows him? If Trump adds to sanctions on Cuba, if he leaves office claiming Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, which worsens sanctions even more, putting Cuba in an even more desperate situation, and Biden goes along. So I think that's just one point to make in discerning what we're told about who's good, the lesser evil. How are you the lesser evil when you did what the other guy who, we're told is so evil did? So, you're just lesser. You're not, it's no lesser of evilism.
Yeah.
I wanted to tune in and say,
guys, and I'll say go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say the U.S. they see the walls are closing in. This is why they are tiptoeing around Niger, around getting their troops and their base off of there, and getting out of Syria. They see the walls are closing in. They see a new world is being born around them, and one thing they don't want to take away is leverage that they have. As far as these drone bases or these other military bases that they have around the world that is illegal, as I may say, but they know that the world is closing in, and anytime we can be attacked, Israel can be wiped off of the map at any time. And they know that they do not have what it takes to take on Hezbollah or the Houthis. They don't have what it takes to take on China or Russia. NATO is a paper tiger, and we see that, and these countries see that. So I would rather align myself better, with people that I see a future with, than a couple of psychopaths telling me I have to do this, But they see the walls are closing in. They see that the empire is falling, and this is I'm telling. I just said this shit on my last show. These are signs of a dying empire. You put your bases and your troops everywhere. You printing out money like it's crazy. You bombing everything, and then when all the smoke settles, you're still going to fall. This empire is falling, and no matter how much they do, it's like trying to get rid of the ocean with a bucket.
Well, I mean that's a good description. The only problem is the U.S. is still the world's leading military power, and can still create a lot of harm as it's doing now in Gaza, assisting the Israelis, who by the way have nukes themselves. It's quite an open secret. But the U.S. is still dangerous. I liken it to they say an animal's most dangerous when it's wounded. I feel like that's the U.S., but the U.S. is losing influence. The rest of the world wants to. We never hear about these things in the U.S. When they say the world, they're referring to the U.S. and Europe, the U.S., Canada, and Europe. They're referring to NATO. They're not referring to the whole world. Most of the world, when this all too short ceasefire was declared at the UN, and of course Israel ignored it, there was actual applause, and people who watched the UN says that never happens. Most of the world was so happy to see some indication that the US can be thwarted. And that tells you how most of the world really feels about the United States. Why do countries want to be in the BRICS? They want to move away from the dollar, the domination of the dollar, the U.S. ability to sanction them or punish them at a whim. So the world wants independence. The world does not want the U.S. to control everyone's life, to control economies, to decide who is or isn't in office. That's not what the world wants. The world wants a multipolar world.